Okay, so we have a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and today it's great to have Chris here, who's a co-founder and former chief creative officer for StockX. You guys pioneered the entire sneaker collecting industry, the modern one for sure. Came up with an entire new approach for that. You had a bunch of experience in the startup space and in the digital space, and the marketing space. So I'm excited to get into your story and appreciate you coming on.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Great. So, where did this kind of passion for design and user experience come from? Is it something that you kind of had growing up? Like, how did this originate?
Yeah, I think it started at a very early age. I think just, something about noticing details, even in typography when I was very young. Looking at the letters on the school buses, the letters on the backs of sports jerseys, labels in the grocery store. And I think at a very early age, I started to recognize that things like design and especially typography have personality. A big, bold, blocky uh, typeface feels serious, and something that is more round and whimsical feels more fun. And I started seeing that in logos and in brand campaigns. And I was, oh gosh, probably 8 or 9 years old when I started noticing things like that. And I would come home from school and redraw something that I noticed, or start redrawing a logo. And there's just something about it that was really interesting to me. And I think so much of it was just recognizing that there is so much emotion that can be conveyed through details. And that was just super cool to me.
So, where did the kind of the sneaker tie-in come from? Like, were you always collecting sneakers too, and recognizing, was that just a space you're into, or it happened later on?
Not at all. You know, when we started StockX, it was really about the market fit and solving a problem. It wasn't so much about sneakers. Like we always said,
Mm.
Amazon was never just about books. But we were a bunch of guys from Detroit that grew up in the 80s and 90s. Big Pistons fans, the bad boy era, and the cool shoes in the 80s and 90s were Jordans. But if you were a basketball fan from Detroit, you didn't want anything to do with Michael Jordan or the Bulls. So, the only cool shoes that we had were, maybe Chucks or Reebok pumps or, Vans or Airwalk. Like those were the things we were wearing. But, really, I hadn't thought about sneakers, since I was a kid. You go to the store, you work out in the yard, ride your bike, but I didn't even know that this was such a huge industry and opportunity. And I think that the coolest thing is the culture around it that we discovered, and being able to I say we're a guest in the culture, and I certainly feel like a visitor, and hope I've done that culture well. But it is a really really fascinating place, and for us it was looking at things that were happening in that market. And early on we had this idea to apply stock market mechanics to a secondary retail market. We didn't know if that would be sneakers or trading cards. We thought about things like collectible cars and wine and watches, and the list goes on. But ultimately, like we always called sneakers the Goldilocks product, meaning 70% of the market brand new in the box. Uh, Relatively high volume product, pretty much guaranteed weekly releases. So we were able to tap into a market where there was a lot of movement, but also there at the time there wasn't a lot of technology or e-com platforms that were really doing this very well, which is where we saw an opportunity because people were dealing with things like counterfeits. There wasn't a lot of market transparency. There certainly wasn't anonymity, meaning if you bought something, you had to actually go meet up with that person or get it on eBay. If you had customer service concerns, you had to deal directly with an individual. And for us, we were looking at those things and saying, what are the market mechanics that really make the stock market different? And those things were anonymity, transparency, and authenticity. Right? You buy a share of stock, you have no idea who you're buying it from. You know exactly what the last person paid for it, and you have no doubt that what you're getting is real. And we wanted to apply those same kind of mechanics to retail.
Hmm. So how did you kind of meet the other founders? Were they part of different businesses with your childhood friends? Like there was three other people. How did that come about?
Yeah, so Greg, we were partners in another startup called Up2 that we ran for about 4.5 years. Built that business to about 15 people, small, a couple million active users, and this was, back 2013 was kind of when we were in the middle of that, and it was like good user base, but really to hit a level of saturation and hit that tipping point, like you got to be over 10 million users to get the kind of activity you need on the platform. And what we were doing there was looking at the social landscape at the time, and you had everything from Facebook to Twitter. Foursquare was very popular at the time. Like GoWallow was still floating around out there. But everything in the social media world was either past tense or present tense. There wasn't anything around the future tense. So if you wanted to plan something with friends, um, see what friends were doing, you could only see what they were doing in that moment or
Mhm.
what they already did. And those were the two things that Twitter and Facebook were kind of good at. Like, a lot of Facebook was people talking about the things they just did. Twitter was people talking about things in the moment, and in that regard, those platforms haven't changed that much. But there was nothing really super future focused at the time, and we had this idea to leverage the calendar to allow people to interact socially, to share events. Part of that process, we found that the stuff that was on people's calendars really wasn't that interesting. Nobody wanted to share the finance meeting with their friends or significant other.
Mhm.
So we started thinking about the things that people do that are fun and interesting that they don't necessarily put on their calendar. So we were thinking about things like concerts, movies, TV shows, even things like going to yoga at the YMCA or maybe going to an event at church. And none of these things were on calendars. So we created a public facing directory of about 35,000 calendars, and it had everything. Every major league sports game, every movie, every TV show, and you could drag and drop those things directly into your calendar. And it was a two-layered approach where you could see all the social stuff you were adding, but then you could condense it and see your actual calendar at the same time, and drag and drop events to share. Um, we got to a point where growth had plateaued, started chopping that business around. We talked to Groupon, Eventbrite, Dropbox, Microsoft, and Yahoo. And ultimately, everyone passed except Yahoo. Microsoft ended up acquiring our largest competitor at the time, which was Sunrise. And Yahoo made us an offer, and we were ready to take it. We were ready to go. We found places to live out in Sunnyvale. Uh, and basically, a couple days before we signed the closing docs, Dan Gilbert, who is owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers, founder of Rocket Mortgage, and our first investor at Up2, called us into his office in Detroit and said, "Hey, like you're Detroit guys, you've always told me you want to be here, creating jobs, building businesses, helping revitalize Detroit's economy. How are you going to do that in California?" And we said, "Well, we're not, at least for now." And but Silicon Valley acquisition on the resume of some guys who want to keep starting early stage businesses is not a bad credential to have. And we're out of money. And Dan said, I feel like Yahoo is a sinking ship, and I don't think their culture is really going to be a good fit for the way you guys work. What if you just showed up here Monday morning and you start a new business? You can sit with me outside my office, and I'll fund it. You build it. And at the time, we're like, that sounds like a great proposition, but we have absolutely no ideas for what to build next because we thought we were, fully in on this calendar thing. And Dan said, well, I've got this idea about applying stock market mechanics to secondary retail. I've been kind of bouncing around in my head for the last 20 years. And of course, the next question was, sounds interesting. Like, what is it? How does it work? Like, what do you sell? And he's like, oh, I have no idea. That's the whole idea. But you guys know brand and marketing and product and engineering, and you've got a good team. Come figure it out. And for some crazy reason, we bailed on that Yahoo acquisition. Showed up to Dan's office that Monday, which was early February of 2015, and we got working on the thing that eventually became StockX.
Mhm. So how long did it take you to launch StockX, and like what were the initial ways you got traction for it? Was it just word of mouth, or like how did you kind of figure that out?
Yeah, so it took about 11 months to launch, which at the time felt like forever. But looking back now, that was so fast. There were really only four or five of us at the time, and it was me and Greg. And about 6 months in, we realized we really didn't know anything about the sneaker space. Like we're like, all right, we've got the design and marketing and product and all this stuff figured out, but I think to do this authentically and to figure out the data part of it, like we really needed somebody who was immersed in that world. And we just happened to come across this guy, Josh Luber, who was a consultant at IBM at the time on the data side. He was a big sneakerhead from Philly, and had this side project called Campless that was essentially the Kelly Blue Book for sneakers. And we ended up meeting with him and had this moment. I was like, wow, this guy knows all the stuff about the sneaker culture that we don't know. And he happens to have all the data that we would love to roll into our website. So we ended up bringing Josh on. We acquired Campus, rolled all the data into StockX. Josh became our first CEO. And that was really the core team at that point, and we really just started growing from there. Uh, how we kind of grew in the beginning was interesting, and it certainly helped to have a billionaire co-founder and investor in Dan with a very high appetite for risk because marketplaces pose one of the most challenging chicken and egg scenarios. And it's who do you go after first, buyers or sellers? And we thought about that a lot. And where we kind of landed was if we don't have buyers, the sellers will never come. But if we don't have product, the buyers will never come. And what we did was we just started
Huh.
listing things on the site that we didn't have. And when people bought them, we went out and found them. Uh, Sometimes we could find them for what they bought them for. Sometimes we couldn't. In the early days, we probably lost, $6 on every transaction. But that saturation on the marketplace of all of these different products, it really drove a combination of opportunities in digital marketing. So we were able to do paid ads and a lot of Google Shopping and linking people directly to products that they were searching for. And slowly but surely, people started to realize, oh, this new platform has all these sneakers that we're looking for, and they're verified authentic. We have an in-house authentication process that every product that goes through the site runs through. We had transparent market pricing, which really upset a lot of sellers in the beginning because people didn't know what the market was for a lot of things. So
Mm.
people ended up paying a lot more than they should have. And us coming in, eventually we really democratized that, and that led to a huge shift in that market.
Yeah, it's fascinating how you guys kind of put the product on before and realized this is like the core of it all. We have to have that on, and took a loss at it to you got it. I mean, how long did it take to really get the traction once you had a certain amount of products on? Like was it like and really have a certain amount of users? Was it like a couple years or was it more like Okay, people realize this after a couple of months.
Yeah, it was probably about 6 months before we really started to see traction, and a couple things happened that, yeah, and I always tell people, like, when you're starting a business, especially a early stage tech startup, half the battle is right place at the right time. Obviously you need to recognize the opportunity, and you need to work hard, and there's a lot of sacrifice that goes into that. But if you're not in the right place at the right time, you don't have the right market fit, and this perfect storm doesn't align, it's going to be really hard to be successful. And for us, part of it was we got lucky. There was a big Jordan re-release the fall of the year we launched, and people, you had tens of thousands of people looking for these shoes, and they were finding them on StockX, and we went from a few orders a day to hundreds of orders a day. And then not long after that, and this was when we were just starting to get traction and people were starting to discover the brand. And it was something that, I think probably the most diehard sneakerheads were still the only ones who knew about it. Uh, we had our first Black Friday. And that, especially in 2015, 2016, those were huge release cycles for Adidas and Nike. And especially back then on the Adidas side, you had Ultra Boosts were selling at a premium. NMDs were really popular. Pharrell was involved with their brand, which was driving a lot of demand. Nike was still popping off. Jordan was still doing a lot of retros and new releases that were popular, and all of those things contributed to some really massive holiday seasons for us. And what we found happened was our business grew 70% or 100% overnight, every Black Friday for several years. And, we do this thing where business would skyrocket and, would kind of come back down after the holidays, but it never came back down anywhere close to where it was before. And, we really experienced that type of meteoric growth every year around the holidays for years, until a point where it kind of became a household name in this space.
Hmm. How did you guys develop the authentication process? I mean, it's such a pivotal part of StockX, and something it's kind of been scrutinized a bit, but overall, it's been the industry standard. It's been the best in class. So, how did you guys do that even at a smaller point when you're building the business, and then kind of scale it up efficiently?
Yeah, a lot of research, a lot of training. The best way to know what a fake looks like is to get your hand on some fakes and to compare those to real sneakers and literally document every single possible detail you can find that's different. Um, from there, creating very comprehensive uh, documentation around what to look for. That also, in fakes, what the what traits of a real sneaker, everything from the quality of the leather, the thread, the smell, how things perform under different types of light, and from there we were able to build out that documentation and really create a training program because the job sneaker authenticator didn't really exist before us and Goat and some others. And now it's a job title that people have on their resumes and their LinkedIn, and it's kind of cool to know that we were a part of that, and really creating a very comprehensive training program that trains people across everything from electronics to sneakers to trading cards and many of the other things on our platform. And they're all trained in those areas. We've got specialists in different brands and different uh, sneaker profiles. So it actually gets pretty detailed at this point.
Hmm. I think just one of the last questions that I have is, so you guys have kind of expanded a bunch of different categories. Like, what do you think is really the next steps for StockX? Is it more kind of supporting different types of products? Is it expanding into new categories? You experimented with NFTs a bit. Like, what are some of the next steps?
I I think a lot of it, it's there's two sides to it, right? There's the operational side of the business, and then there's the brand side of the business. And, I would say that expanding verticals kind of crosses into both. From an operational side, being really focused on the customer experience, getting people product faster. Just launched something that we're calling Express Ship a couple days ago, which on a lot of the popular sneakers, it's going to provide 3-day shipping or less. Which in the world of Amazon, that's just an expectation these days, and being able to offer that is going to be huge for customers. But I think another thing is really looking at where the culture is going. And I think we have a generation coming up where my generation, like our definition of cool was things that were made in mass production, but at somewhat limited quantities. So like all the cool people had them, you could still get them for a premium. But there were a lot of those items floating around. I think we have a generation coming up that is far more into one of one and bespoke and like super limited edition stuff. And, um, you know, being cool isn't so much about doing what cool people's doing. It's doing what is kind of true to your authentic self. And I think what's going to come of that is an opportunity to, really let the platform grow over time to support these makers and to provide a place for these very limited run collaborations to, be able to be sold. And also from a content perspective, really being able to give the community an authentic voice. And it's never been about what we say is cool. It's what everyone else says is cool, and it's kind of our job to take all of that and provide a platform where it can all live in one spot.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, look, I think that's all the time we have here, Chris. So I appreciate you coming on. I think you have an incredible story. You've built something that's really changed the world. It's made an impact on this entire culture and has shaped it and enabled a lot more people to even enter it too. So I think whatever you do next, I'm always excited for that. And thanks for coming on.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. This was great. Thanks for having me.